The night Eleanor Whitmore opened her front door, she thought she was about to die. Rain hammered the roof of her crumbling farmhouse like fists. Thunder rattled the windows. The power had gone out nearly an hour earlier, leaving the small Kansas town swallowed in darkness. At 78 years old, Eleanor lived alone at the edge of town, in a house that looked like it had given up years ago. The porch sagged, the paint peeled in long strips. Water leaked through the ceiling into metal buckets she had placed around her living room. Then she heard it. Hands, the roar of motorcycles. Not one, not two, dozens. The sound grew louder until it seemed the earth itself was shaking beneath her feet. Eleanor peeked through her curtain and froze. 30 bikers dressed in black leather had pulled into her muddy driveway. Their motorcycles gleamed under flashes of lightning. Their jackets carried a name she had only heard in frightening news stories and whispered conversations. Hell's Angels. Her breathing turned shallow. Her late husband, Walter, had been gone for 12 years, and ever since then, Eleanor had faced life alone. She had survived grief, poverty, and loneliness, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. Then someone knocked on her door, a loud, heavy knock. Eleanor gripped her chest and whispered a prayer before slowly opening it. Standing before her was a massive gray-bearded biker, soaked from the rain. His face looked rough enough to frighten anyone, but his eyes held something unexpected. Respect. He removed his helmet and explained that a violent storm had flooded the highway. Roads were blocked. Their group had been stranded with nowhere to stay until morning. Every motel in town had closed due to the blackout, and gas stations refused to let them remain there. They only needed temporary shelter from the storm. Eleanor looked past him at the men standing in the rain. They looked exhausted, cold, hungry, and despite her fear, she saw something else, human being. Before this story continues, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel if you believe people deserve second chances. Eleanor had almost nothing. Her refrigerator contained leftover soup, a carton of eggs, and some vegetables from her small garden. Her savings account had less than $200. Her roof was collapsing. Her heating system barely worked. But Walter had always told her something she never forgot. Someone is hungry and you can feed them, you do it. So Eleanor stepped aside and invited them in. At first, the bikers hesitated. Her tiny farmhouse could barely hold 10 people, let alone 30. But Eleanor refused to let anyone stay outside in that storm. She lit candles throughout the house and began working in her tiny kitchen. She opened every can in her pantry. She cooked pasta. She made soup. She fried potatoes. She baked old bread into garlic toast. She served every single person before taking a single bite herself. The bikers sat awkwardly around her house, on floors, counters, stairs, and broken chairs. At first, silence filled the room. Then something changed. One biker noticed framed military medals on Eleanor's wall. They belonged to Walter. He had served in Vietnam and later worked as a mechanic until cancer took his life. That opened the floodgates. One biker shared how he lost his brother in Iraq. Another admitted he hadn't spoken to his daughter in 6 years. One quietly revealed he was raising his grandson alone. For hours, Eleanor listened, and for the first time in years, her house felt alive again. Laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for over a decade. At midnight, Eleanor handed out blankets, towels, and old pillows. Some bikers slept on the floor. Others stayed on the porch. A few remained awake, quietly fixing loose boards on her steps after noticing how dangerous they were. Before sunrise, Eleanor woke up to silence. The bikers were gone. She rushed outside in panic. The driveway was empty. Only muddy tire tracks remained. And sitting on her porch was a handwritten note. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it. It read, "A thank you for treating us like family when the world judged us by our jackets. You fed us when you had little. You gave us warmth when no one else would. We will never forget your kindness. Stay home tomorrow. Trust us." No signature, no explanation, just confusion. Wah. Eleanor spent the entire day wondering what the note meant. The following morning, she woke to a sound louder than thunder. Motorcycles. Hundreds of them. She looked outside and nearly collapsed. Her road was completely packed. Hundreds upon hundreds of bikers stretched farther than she could see. Neighbors stood frozen on their lawns. Police officers directed traffic. News vans arrived, and at the front stood the same gray-bearded biker from the night before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Nearly 800 Hells Angels members had arrived from surrounding states. Behind them were trucks carrying lumber, roofing materials, windows, paint supplies, furniture, appliances, and construction equipment. Eleanor stood on her porch speechless as the biker handed her another note. It simply said, Today let us take care of you." What happened next became legendary in that town. Roofers climbed onto her collapsing home and tore away decades of damage. Electricians rewired dangerous circuits. Plumbers fixed broken pipes. Contractors rebuilt her porch. Landscapers cleaned her yard. Volunteers painted every wall. Women from nearby churches brought food. Even skeptical neighbors joined in after witnessing what was happening. The story spread across social media within hours. By afternoon, donations began pouring in from strangers across the country. People sent furniture, clothing, groceries, letters. One donation stood out. A local hospital administrator saw Eleanor's story online, discovered she had been skipping heart medication because she couldn't afford prescriptions. The hospital announced they would cover her medical expenses for life. Eleanor broke down crying. But the biggest surprise came later that evening. While workers repaired her attic, they found boxes filled with Walter's old belongings. Inside was a stack of unpaid property tax notices Eleanor had hidden from herself because she couldn't bear opening. She was only weeks away from losing her home forever. A biker named Marcus quietly took the papers. The next morning, he returned with tears in his eyes. The debt had been fully paid. Anonymous donors had handled everything. Eleanor no longer owed a single dollar. For the first time in years, she could breathe. Days later, her transformed house looked unrecognizable. A new roof gleamed in the sunlight. Fresh white paint covered the walls. A wheelchair ramp had been installed for her future safety. Her garden was restored. Her refrigerator was fully stocked. Her bedroom had new furniture. Even Walter's old workshop had been rebuilt. On the final day, the bikers gathered outside before leaving. Eleanor stood on her brand new porch staring at the men's society often called monsters, yet all she saw were protectors. Broken men who understood pain. Men who remembered kindness. The gray-bearded leader handed Eleanor one final gift, a leather photo album. Inside were photographs of the entire rebuilding process. On the final page was a message signed by hundreds of bikers. You reminded us that kindness still exists. Now whenever you need family, you have 800 sons. Eleanor cried so hard she could barely stand. Months passed. Her story inspired national headlines, but Eleanor never cared about fame. What mattered most happened every Sunday. Motorcycles began arriving regularly, sometimes 10, sometimes 50. Sometimes more. They helped maintain her home. They brought groceries. They celebrated holidays with her. They visited her like family. Her once empty dining table was now always full. On her 80th birthday, over 300 bikers arrived carrying flowers, gifts, and a massive birthday cake. Eleanor looked around at the people life had unexpectedly brought her and whispered that she had never imagined loneliness could end so beautifully. Before we reach the ending, comment below with one word: kindness. If you believe even small acts of compassion can change someone's life forever. Years later, when Eleanor peacefully passed away in her sleep at age 86, the town prepared for a quiet funeral. Instead, thousands of motorcycles arrived. The sound stretched for miles. People stepped outside crying as endless rows of bikers escorted her funeral procession. They lined the roads in silence. Many openly wept. At her graveside, the gray-bearded leader placed a single white rose on her casket. He said Eleanor had fed strangers during the darkest night of their lives. And in doing so, she became a mother to men who had forgotten what unconditional love felt like. After her burial, the bikers announced they were creating a national charity in her honor that would repair homes for struggling widows and elderly veterans. They named it Eleanor's Table, because one warm meal changed everything. And that tiny farmhouse where she once sat alone in silence became a community center that fed families in need every week. Her kindness outlived her. And that may be the most powerful legacy of all. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe for more emotional, true, inspired stories that remind us kindness still exists in this world. A year after Eleanor's funeral, people still talked about the day thousands of motorcycles rolled through that quiet Kansas town like a thunderstorm made of grief. Many assumed her story had ended at her grave. They were wrong. Because Eleanor Whitmore's greatest miracle happened after she was gone. The little farmhouse she left behind had become a weekly community kitchen called Eleanor's Table, run by volunteers, veterans, church members, and bikers who once considered themselves too broken to care about anyone. Every Sunday, hot meals were served to struggling families, homeless veterans, widows, and anyone who needed help. Her framed photograph hung near the entrance, her soft smile greeting every person who walked through those doors. But keeping the center alive wasn't easy. Donations slowed. Utility bills piled up. The aging building needed constant repairs. And without Eleanor's story constantly in headlines, people slowly moved on. The gray-bearded biker who first knocked on her door, whose real name was Frank Reaper Malone, refused to let her legacy die. Die. At 63 years old, he had spent most of his life carrying regret. He had lost his wife to addiction, his son in a drunk driving crash, and nearly drank himself to death before meeting Eleanor. That one rainy night changed him forever. He became the unofficial protector of Eleanor's Table. Every Sunday he arrived before sunrise to sweep floors, unload groceries, and cook meals. And every Sunday he quietly sat in Eleanor's old rocking chair after everyone left. One winter evening, Reaper discovered something that would shake the entire town. A developer from out of state had purchased several nearby properties and planned to build a luxury shopping center. Eleanor's community kitchen sat directly in the middle of their expansion project. The developers offered money, then threats. Then legal pressure. They claimed the land had hidden zoning violations and demanded the building be vacated within 30 days. The town panicked. Volunteers cried. Families who depended on the meals feared losing everything. And for Reaper, it felt like losing Eleanor all over again. Before continuing, if you believe good people deserve to be protected, like this video, comment your country below. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more emotional stories that restore faith in humanity. Reaper refused to surrender. He gathered hundreds of bikers from multiple states. Veterans arrived. Church groups joined. Single mothers who had been fed at Eleanor's Table showed up. Former homeless men who rebuilt their lives because of Eleanor stood beside them. The town courthouse became packed. The developer expected an easy legal victory. Instead, they faced something powerful. Story after story. A widow spoke about how Eleanor's Table kept her children fed after her husband died. A veteran revealed the center saved him from suicide. An elderly man admitted he survived winter because volunteers delivered food to his home. Then Reaper stood before the courtroom. For the first time in his life, the intimidating biker cried publicly. He described the night Eleanor fed 30 strangers without asking who they were. He admitted that before meeting her, he had become a man filled with rage. She changed that, as she saw human beings where others saw monsters. The courtroom fell silent. Then an elderly lawyer quietly entered carrying old documents. He revealed himself as Walter Whitmore's former military friend. Years earlier, Walter had secretly purchased additional land surrounding Eleanor's property but never told anyone before his death. The forgotten deed proved the developers had no legal claim. The courtroom erupted. The case was immediately dismissed. The developers walked out, humiliated. The town celebrated like they had won a war, but fate had one more emotional surprise waiting. While cleaning Eleanor's old attic storage room, volunteers discovered a locked wooden chest hidden beneath floorboards. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters Eleanor had written before her death. Each envelope had a specific name. One was addressed to Reaper. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside, Eleanor wrote that she knew her time was limited. She thanked him for giving her family in her final years. Then she revealed something that shattered him. Eleanor had quietly noticed a newspaper clipping Reaper once carried in his wallet, the obituary of his estranged son. But she had done her own research. His son never died. The obituary was fake. Reaper's former wife had disappeared with their son decades earlier after a bitter custody battle and fabricated the death story to keep them apart. Eleanor had hired a private investigator before her death. She included an address. Her final words read, go find your boy. Life is too short for unfinished love. Reaper collapsed to the floor sobbing. For decades he believed his son was buried. Now hope returned. Days later, Reaper rode across 3 states with dozens of bikers beside him. They reached a small town in Colorado. There, working at an auto repair garage, stood a 40-year-old man who looked exactly like Reaper when he was young, his son, Daniel. The reunion was painful, awkward, emotional. Years of lies had stolen decades from both men. Daniel had grown up believing his father abandoned him. Reaper believed his son was dead, but truth slowly broke through the pain. And for the first time in 40 years, father and son embraced. Neither let go. Months later, Daniel moved his family closer to Kansas. He began volunteering at Eleanor's table with Reaper. Together, they rebuilt motorcycles for charity auctions that funded food programs. The once angry biker now spent weekends teaching children how to repair engines. His grandchildren called him Grandpa, a title he thought he'd never hear. Before the ending, comment Eleanor lives on if this story touched your heart and you believe one act of kindness can echo for generations. 5 years later, Eleanor's Table had grown into a national nonprofit. They rebuilt homes, fed families, paid medical bills, supported veterans, and helped thousands of struggling widows. All because one elderly woman opened her door during a storm. At the grand opening of the organization's new headquarters, a bronze statue of Eleanor was revealed. It showed her holding a bowl of soup with her warm smile frozen forever. At the bottom were words that made everyone cry. Feed strangers, love fearlessly, change lives forever. Hundreds of bikers stood silently as Reaper placed his hand on the statue. He looked at the sky and whispered something only he could hear. Then engines roared across the city, not in anger, not in fear, but in honor of a woman who proved compassion can rewrite destinies, because sometimes heroes don't wear capes, sometimes they wear aprons, sometimes they live in broken houses, and sometimes they save the world with nothing more than a warm meal and an open heart. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, because stories like Eleanor's remind us that humanity is still alive.